I heard the CEO sign my execution order through a broken vent in the soundproof glass. They planned to fire me on Friday, right after my code launched, and just days before my 5% equity vested. They thought I would quietly pack my cardboard box and leave them to their $200 million buyout. They forgot one fundamental rule: the architect who builds your system can also bury it. I did not cry. I just started typing. Hello to our amazing audience at Boss Revenge Stories. Unfortunately, YouTube has completely demonetized our channel, leaving us without the budget to keep operating, which means we will be forced to stop uploading new videos here in the near future and transition our operations to Patreon. If you enjoy today's story, please support us by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon to hear even more incredible, exclusive true stories that are longer and feature highly detailed situations we simply cannot publish on YouTube. All brought to life by a cast of emotional voice actors. You can join us right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link in the video description or pinned comment. Now, let us dive into today's story and meet our main character, Chloe Rivera. The air conditioning in the Chicago office of AeroShift Logistics always ran a few degrees too cold. It kept people awake, moving, and constantly coding. At 32 years old, I was the lead data architect, and I had spent the last 72 hours glued to my dual monitors. I was running the final latency checks on the spatial navigation module, a highly complex artificial intelligence routing algorithm I had built from scratch. It was designed to optimize freight routes across North America, cutting fuel consumption by margins that logistics companies would kill for. My code was sleek, beautiful, and flawless. My laptop battery dipped below 10%, flashing a stark red warning. I rubbed my exhausted eyes and stood up, walking toward the small glass-walled meeting room at the center of the office. I had left my high-speed charging cable in there during a morning stand-up meeting. The startup workspace was a modern marvel of open-plan design, segmented only by heavy, soundproof glass that gave the illusion of transparency while guarding corporate secrets. I stepped into the quiet room and bent down to unplug my charger from the floor socket. As I kneeled, my ear brushed past a small metal ventilation grate near the baseboard. The grate connected directly to the adjacent office, which belonged to Vance Sterling, our chief executive officer. The soundproofing was supposed to be absolute, but someone from maintenance had improperly removed the internal acoustic baffle inside the air duct. Through that tiny, broken gap, the voices from Vance's office carried through with crystal-clear precision. I froze, my hand hovering inches from the wall, as I heard my own name. "Chloe is deploying the final version of the module on Friday morning," Vance said. His voice was smooth, carrying that fake Silicon Valley charm he used on investors. "The moment the build is stable and the routing data goes green, you call her into human resources." Another voice answered. It was the chief financial officer. "Are you absolutely sure about the timing, Vance? She built the entire back end." "That is exactly why she has to go," Vance replied, a cruel edge slicing through his usual polish. "If she is still an employee by next Wednesday, her 5% equity officially vests. We are closing the acquisition deal with Apex Global in 2 weeks. They are buying AeroShift for $200 million. I am not handing over $10 million to a quiet, antisocial code monkey who just got lucky with a few algorithms. Fire her on Friday afternoon. Use the standard termination paperwork and tell her she is just not a culture fit." "And if she fights it?" the chief financial officer asked. "She will not fight it," Vance scoffed. "She is a data nerd. Offer her a severance package of 3 weeks of pay. Make her sign the non-disclosure agreement and have security escort her out. She will take the pennies and walk." My heart slammed against my ribs, a sudden, violent thud that echoed in my own ears. 3 years. I had poured 3 years of my life, my weekends, and my sanity into building the foundation of AeroShift Logistics. I had slept under my desk to fix server crashes while Vance was out drinking champagne with venture capitalists. My dedication was not valued. It was just a stepping stone for his $200 million payday. I looked at my hands. They were perfectly still. There was no tremor, no panic, no blinding rage. The emotional detachment that made me an exceptional software engineer kicked in instantly, analyzing the variables of this betrayal like a critical bug in a system. They wanted to steal my life's work and throw me onto the street with 3 weeks of severance. I quietly pulled my charger from the wall and stood up. I smoothed the wrinkles in my black trousers, walked out of the glass room, and returned to my desk in the freezing open office. I sat down and opened my code editor. The flashing cursor waited for my command. The easiest thing to do would be to delete the repository, sabotage the current servers, and watch them burn. But that would be amateurish, emotional, and highly illegal. Instead, I decided to do exactly what Vance wanted. I would finish the module and hand them a perfectly functioning, completely unscalable trap. I began typing, laying the groundwork for a shadow architecture that would not just disrupt their payday, but absolutely destroy them. Malicious code is a rookie mistake. It leaves a blazing digital footprint that corporate forensic auditors will uncover in a matter of hours. If I inserted a logic bomb, a backdoor, or deliberately crashed the servers, Vance would not just fire me. He would hand me over to federal authorities and sue me for every penny I would ever earn. So, I played strictly by the rules. I decided to give him exactly what my employment contract stipulated. I would deliver a flawless, high-performance routing module optimized perfectly for our current operational capacity. AeroShift Logistics currently managed a fleet of 500 trucks. The algorithms I had spent months writing handled that specific load beautifully, calculating routes and fuel metrics in milliseconds. However, the foundational problem with the company lay in its legacy database, an ancient, monolithic structure that Vance had refused to upgrade because it would cost too much money. I deliberately bound my new, blazing fast module tightly to this outdated architecture. It was a legally bulletproof strategy. I was dropping a Formula One racing engine into a rusted, deteriorating car frame. It would run like an absolute dream for our 500 trucks, producing flawless metrics and green lights across the board. But Apex Global, the massive conglomerate that was about to buy us out, operated a staggering fleet of 50,000 vehicles. When their engineers inevitably tried to plug 50,000 live data streams into this tightly bound architecture, the legacy database would experience a catastrophic bottleneck. The data queues would pile up exponentially, the memory heaps would overflow, and the entire system would choke to death on its own massive traffic. It was not a bug. It was a fundamental architectural ceiling, a mathematical inevitability, and I was the only person in the building who knew it existed. I was building a glass ceiling, and Vance was about to drive his $200 million deal straight into it. During the day, I remained the obedient, quiet software engineer, but at night, in the dim, blue glow of my small apartment, I became the architect of a new empire. I drank black coffee and typed relentlessly until the early hours of the morning, building a completely new platform from scratch. I named it Velocity Node. While AeroShift relied on bloated middleware and centralized servers that bogged down under heavy loads, I designed Velocity Node using a completely decentralized architecture. I utilized edge computing and peer-to-peer data relays, which bypassed the clunky, traditional middle layers entirely. My new system was infinitely scalable. It could route 500 trucks or 5 million without dropping a single packet of data. The code was elegant, ruthless, and light years ahead of anything on the market. But brilliant code meant absolutely nothing without a cutthroat business strategy. I needed an operator. I needed someone with deep industry connections who hated Vance Sterling as much as I did. On Tuesday evening, I walked into a dimly lit, high-end steakhouse on the outskirts of the city. Marcus Thorne was already sitting in a corner booth, swirling a glass of expensive bourbon. Marcus was the former chief operating officer of AeroShift. He was the brilliant strategist who had actually built the company's initial client base before Vance orchestrated a vicious boardroom coup and forced him out 2 years ago. "You took a massive risk reaching out to me, Chloe," Marcus said, his sharp eyes scanning my face for a hidden motive. "If Vance finds out we are sitting here, he will terminate you before you even order a drink." "Vance is already planning to terminate me on Friday," I replied smoothly, sitting across from him. He wants to stop my equity from vesting so he can keep the entire pie when Apex Global buys the company. Marcus let out a low, bitter chuckle. That sounds exactly like him. He is a parasite. So, what is your play? Are you going to sue him? Lawsuits take years, I told him, sliding a secure, encrypted tablet across the wooden table. I prefer immediate execution. I am building a shadow platform called Velocity Node. It is decentralized. It is infinitely faster, and it bypasses every single structural weakness in AeroShift's current model. Marcus picked up the tablet and began scrolling through the architectural schematics. As an operations veteran, he understood exactly what he was looking at. His eyes widened slightly as the sheer elegance of the design clicked in his mind. "This is a ghost ship," Marcus murmured, genuinely impressed. "It is practically invisible until it strikes. How much data load can this handle?" "All of it," I replied, leaning forward. Apex Global is about to buy a system that will inevitably crash the moment they try to integrate their 50,000 trucks. When that happens, the industry will panic, drivers will be stranded, cargo will rot at the docks, and Apex will be desperate for a lifeline. I am building that lifeline, but I need your network to deploy it, and I need capital to spin up the independent servers. A slow, highly dangerous smile spread across Marcus's face. The prospect of revenge was clearly intoxicating. Vance always was a greedy, short-sighted fool. He thought he could outsmart the people who actually built his kingdom. "How much seed capital do you need to get this infrastructure online by next week?" I gave him the number. He did not even blink. He reached across the table and firmly shook my hand. The angel investment was secured, and our silent partnership was forged in the fires of mutual vengeance. By Thursday afternoon, the tension in the AeroShift office was palpable. I sat at my desk, running the final compilation of my module. The code compiled perfectly, showing 0 errors and 0 warnings. I looked across the open floor plan toward the soundproof glass walls of Vance's office. He was on the phone, pacing back and forth with a smug expression, undoubtedly discussing the final, lucrative terms of his impending buyout. He looked so incredibly confident, so utterly convinced of his own untouchable genius. I reached forward and clicked the mouse. The deployment sequence initiated. A progress bar filled my monitor, quickly reaching 100% before flashing a bright green banner indicating the module was now live on the AeroShift servers. I leaned back in my ergonomic chair, offering a quiet, solitary smirk to my screens. The board was set. The trap was armed. I was stepping back into the shadows, gracefully yielding the stage for Vance to begin his final performance. Friday morning arrived with a blinding display of operational success. Across the open office floor, every single performance dashboard on the wall monitors glowed a vibrant, undisputed green. My newly deployed module was slicing through the logistical chaos of our daily routes with ruthless, breathtaking efficiency. Within the first hour of live operations, the predictive metrics registered an immediate 15% reduction in aggregate fuel costs. It was a staggering, unprecedented number in the freight industry. The code was working exactly as I had promised, optimizing delivery paths for our 500 trucks down to the absolute millimeter. By 10 in the morning, Vance Sterling decided it was time to celebrate his own manufactured genius. He ordered the operations team to gather around the central break room, popping bottles of mid-tier champagne and pouring them into cheap plastic flutes. He stood on a small makeshift platform, flashing a perfectly rehearsed, impossibly white smile. "Look around this room," Vance announced, raising his plastic cup toward the exhausted, sleep-deprived engineers who had actually built his product. "We are not just a company. We are a family. We have bled together. We have sacrificed together. And today, we are changing the world. This milestone belongs to every single one of us." It was a masterful, nauseating performance of corporate hypocrisy. He used words like synergy, culture, and brotherhood, wrapping his suffocating greed in the warm, fuzzy blanket of Silicon Valley idealism. He spoke of our collective vision, painting a picture of a utopian logistics network, while conveniently omitting the fact that the entire architecture rested squarely on my shoulders. I stood in the back of the room, quietly sipping sparkling water, watching a man who had already signed my professional death warrant preach about loyalty and togetherness. Exactly 2 hours later, the grand illusion of family abruptly dissolved. An automated, high-priority email popped onto my screen, instructing me to report to human resources immediately. When I walked into the small, windowless office, the harsh fluorescent lighting illuminated a stark reality. The smell of cheap coffee and warm printer toner hung heavily in the air. Vance was already sitting at the table. His charismatic party smile had vanished completely, replaced by the hollow, dead-eyed stare of a corporate executioner. Beside him sat the head of HR, nervously shuffling a stack of thick legal documents. "Have a seat, Chloe," Vance said, his voice entirely devoid of the warmth he had projected just 120 minutes ago. "I will get straight to the point. As we prepare for the next phase of our evolution, we are restructuring our technical departments. We feel that your working style is no longer a suitable culture fit for the rapid direction we are heading. Effective immediately, your employment at AeroShift Logistics is terminated." The HR manager looked profoundly uncomfortable, avoiding my eyes as Vance pushed a heavy manila folder across the table. "We recognize your past contributions," Vance continued smoothly, sounding as though he were reading from a script. "Therefore, we are offering you a generous severance package of 2 weeks of base pay. In exchange, you simply need to sign this standard non-disclosure agreement, which waives your right to any future equity claims or disparaging remarks against the company." They sat back, waiting for the inevitable breakdown. This was the dark underbelly of the startup dream. The moment you ceased to be profitable, you were no longer a visionary pioneer. You were a liability to be excised with surgical precision. They expected me to cry, to beg for my job, or to scream about the sheer injustice of stealing my equity just days before it legally belonged to me. Vance leaned back in his chair, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth, reveling in the absolute power he believed he held over me. I did not argue. I did not shed a single tear. I looked down at the dense legal jargon of the non-disclosure agreement, then slowly looked up, meeting Vance's arrogant gaze with eyes as cold as absolute zero. I reached out, placed my index finger on the thick stack of paper, and slid it firmly back across the table. "I will not be signing this," I said, my voice perfectly level. I unclipped my plastic employee identification badge from my belt and dropped it onto the table. It landed with a sharp, dismissive clack. Without another word, I stood up, turned my back on them, and walked out the door. As I stepped into the elevator, I glanced back through the glass walls. Vance was staring after me, his brow furrowed in utter confusion. My total lack of emotion had momentarily derailed his perfect, predictable script. But his ego was far too massive to dwell on a strange reaction from a fired employee. As the elevator doors closed, I watched him pull out his phone, his smirk quickly returning. I knew exactly who he was dialing. He was calling the executives at Apex Global to deliver the good news. He was going to tell them that the technology was flawless, that the system was primed for integration, and that he had just eliminated a costly obstacle. I walked out of the building and stepped into the crisp afternoon air. The parking lot was mostly empty. I got into my sedan, locked the doors, and placed my laptop on the passenger seat. I flipped the screen open and connected to my secure mobile hotspot. A black terminal window stared back at me. I took a deep breath, a genuine, dangerous smile finally breaking across my face, and typed the execution command for the external servers. The encrypted handshake protocols initiated instantly, bridging the gap between Marcus Thorne's hidden server farms and the cloud infrastructure I had painstakingly designed. I pressed enter. Lines of data cascaded down the screen. The shadow startup was no longer a ghost. Velocity Node was now fully live on the global network, waiting quietly in the dark for the perfect moment to strike. 3 weeks later, the executioner's axe finally swung, but it was not aimed at my neck. It was aimed squarely at the brittle, rotting foundation of Vance Sterling's empire. Apex Global, eager to finalize their $200 million acquisition, initiated their mandatory technical diligence phase. They needed absolute proof that the startup they were buying could handle their colossal operational weight. On a Tuesday morning, they began a live stress test, opening the floodgates to simulate the routing data of their entire North American fleet. That meant pushing the live telemetry, global positioning coordinates, and payload metrics of 50,000 massive freight trucks directly into AeroShift's servers. I was sitting in my favorite local coffee shop on the south side of Chicago, sipping a warm vanilla latte, calmly monitoring the public internet traffic routed toward my former employer. I had an array of terminal windows open on my laptop, watching the server response times in real time. The initial ping from Apex Global was small, just a trickle of a few hundred simulated vehicles to establish the connection. The legacy database swallowed it easily. Then, the floodgates blew wide open. It was a digital massacre, as the data load spiked from 500 trucks to 5,000, and then violently surged toward 50,000. The ancient architecture. I had deliberately shackled my perfect module to begin to scream. I watched the latency metrics on my screen climb from a healthy 20 milliseconds to 500, then 2,000, and then the numbers simply stopped updating. The routing module itself did not fail. It dutifully processed every single complex algorithmic equation thrown at it, demanding more and more data storage to hold the calculated routes. But the old, rusted database beneath it simply could not keep up. The data queues piled up into an insurmountable mountain. The memory heaps overflowed. The server processors pinned themselves at 100% capacity and stayed there until they effectively choked to death. In the real world, this invisible digital collapse manifested as pure, unadulterated chaos. Thousands of independent truck drivers, relying on the AeroShift mobile application for their turn-by-turn navigation, suddenly stared at frozen screens. Deliveries of perishable goods, industrial steel, and retail inventory ground to a devastating halt. At the massive freight ports along Lake Michigan, cargo staged for immediate transit became hopelessly gridlocked. Dispatchers frantically refreshed their management dashboards, only to be met with a relentless barrage of 502 bad gateway errors. The entire logistical nervous system of AeroShift had shattered into a million irreparable pieces. Inside the glass walls of AeroShift, the situation had deteriorated into a genuine corporate nightmare. Though I was not in the building, my extensive network of former colleagues fed me live updates through encrypted messaging applications. Vance Sterling was completely unhinged. The charismatic, polished chief executive who had toasted to family just 3 weeks prior was now screaming obscenities at his remaining engineering staff. His $200 million payday was evaporating before his eyes, and he was desperate for a scapegoat. He ordered the development team to roll back the servers, to bypass the module, to do absolutely anything to get the data flowing again. But they quickly discovered the beautiful, terrifying reality of what I had built. My code was a masterpiece of hyper-efficient engineering. It was perfectly compiled, intensely complex, and woven so deeply into the fabric of the server that removing it would require dismantling the entire back-end piece by piece. The junior engineers Vance had kept on payroll stared blankly at my architectural diagrams. They simply did not possess the technical literacy to untangle the web I had woven, let alone rebuild the core database architecture while under the immense pressure of a live, catastrophic outage. Vance was trapped in a burning building, and I had taken the only fire extinguisher with me when he fired me. As the fires raged in Vance's boardroom, my silent partner began his surgical strike. Marcus Thorne had spent the last 2 decades building an ironclad reputation among the grizzled, no-nonsense executives who ran the Midwest transportation hubs. He knew every major fleet manager, every port director, and every warehouse supervisor who was currently screaming into their telephones at AeroShift customer support. Marcus picked up his phone and started making calls. He did not pitch a future dream. He offered immediate salvation. He dialed the head of dispatch for a major Midwestern carrier who was currently losing thousands of dollars an hour. "I know your trucks are blind right now," Marcus told the furious manager on the other end of the line. "Point your data streams to Velocity Node. It is fully decentralized. It will not crash. and I'm giving you the first month entirely for free. Get your drivers moving again. In the logistics industry, where every stalled hour costs tens of thousands of dollars, a free, functioning lifeline was an offer no desperate manager could possibly refuse. I sat in the coffee shop, watching my secondary monitor as the Velocity Node intake servers began to light up. It started as a small flicker, just 2 or 3 regional trucking companies pointing their data streams toward our application programming interfaces. Within 45 minutes, that flicker roared into a blazing inferno of incoming traffic. They tested us, hitting my decentralized network with massive, erratic data loads to see if we would buckle like AeroShift did. Velocity Node did not even blink. The peer-to-peer data relays swallowed the incoming metrics, distributed the processing weight across the edge servers, and spat out flawlessly optimized routes in a fraction of a second. It was smooth, silent, and incredibly lethal. The migration happened entirely in the shadows. AeroShift's biggest clients, tired of the constant 502 errors and Vance's empty promises of an imminent fix, simply stopped trying to reconnect to the old system. They quietly signed digital onboarding contracts with Velocity Node, migrating their entire operational fleets over to my infrastructure in a matter of hours. I watched the live dashboard of my shadow startup update in real time, the registered truck count climbing into the tens of thousands. Vance Sterling thought he was just trimming a little excess fat to maximize his payout. He never realized that the quiet engineer he threw away was actually the only load-bearing pillar holding up his entire universe. Now that pillar was gone, the roof was caving in, and his most valuable clients were actively walking out the back door into my waiting arms. I took a slow, deeply satisfying sip of my vanilla latte, smiling at the glowing green metrics on my screen. The trap had not just snapped shut, it had completely devoured him. Apex Global did not become an international titan by tolerating amateurish incompetence. The catastrophic failure during the morning stress test had sent immediate shockwaves through their executive board. Within 24 hours of the system crash, their aggressive legal department had drafted a ferocious notice of intent. They formally threatened to obliterate the $200 million acquisition entirely and drag AeroShift into a grueling, highly public litigation battle for blatantly misrepresenting their technological capabilities. They wanted blood, and they wanted their operational damages covered. Vance was cornered, and like any cornered predator, he lashed out wildly in every direction. He summoned his high-priced corporate attorneys into his glass office, screaming accusations of corporate sabotage. He demanded they draft a massive lawsuit against me, accusing me of injecting malicious code and intentionally destroying his intellectual property just before I left. He wanted me bankrupted, blacklisted from the tech industry, and locked in a federal prison. The legal team spent 48 hours ripping apart my repositories, auditing every single keystroke I had made over the past 3 months. When the lead attorney finally walked back into Vance's office, the room fell dead silent. The lawyer had to look a raging chief executive in the eye and deliver the fatal blow. I had delivered exactly what was requested, completely fulfilling my contract 100% to the letter of the law. There were no hidden logic bombs. There were no unauthorized backdoors. The code was absolutely pristine and functioned perfectly within the original parameters. The attorney explained, in agonizingly clear terms, that the catastrophic failure was caused entirely by the company's own negligent, outdated database architecture. I was legally bulletproof. Vance had absolutely no one to blame but his own aggressive, short-sighted greed, and he could not sue me for writing perfect code. While Vance drowned in legal dead ends and mounting panic, Marcus Thorne orchestrated our master stroke. He leveraged his extensive, decades-long industry connections to bypass the usual corporate gatekeepers and secure a highly confidential meeting with the Vice President of Mergers and Acquisitions for Apex Global, a ruthless dealmaker named Richard Caldwell. The chosen venue was an exclusive, dimly lit private cigar club situated high above downtown Chicago, a place where multi-million-dollar deals were quietly suffocated or born in the shadows over aged scotch and heavy oak tables. I walked into the private lounge wearing a sharp charcoal blazer, carrying nothing but a sleek silver laptop. The air smelled of expensive tobacco and quiet power. Richard Caldwell sat deep in a leather armchair, looking skeptical, impatient, and utterly exhausted by the AeroShift disaster. Marcus made the brief introductions, then immediately stepped back, allowing me to take complete control of the room. I did not waste his time with colorful slide decks, empty marketing jargon, or fake promises of a corporate family. I opened my laptop, turned the high-resolution screen toward Caldwell, and handed him the control parameters. "You broke AeroShift with 50,000 simulated trucks," I said calmly, maintaining direct eye contact. "I want you to hit my servers with 2 million. Caldwell raised a thick eyebrow, clearly thinking this was an arrogant bluff from a disgruntled former employee. He typed the command into my terminal, executing a massive, coordinated synthetic data surge that would have melted Vance's infrastructure in under 3 seconds. Velocity Node absorbed the immense wave of routing data effortlessly. The metrics on the screen stayed vibrant green. The latency remained pinned under 10 milliseconds, and the decentralized nodes instantly distributed the computational weight across the network without a single dropped packet. Caldwell leaned forward, the skepticism vanishing from his eyes completely, replaced by the sharp, predatory gleam of a man who had just found a flawless diamond in the mud. He watched the routing paths optimize in real time, realizing he was looking at a system capable of handling 50 times the volume of the company he was about to buy, with absolutely infinite scalability. "This is extraordinary," Caldwell admitted, slowly pushing the laptop back across the table. "Your architecture is exactly what Vance promised us, but entirely failed to deliver. Apex Global wants to acquire Velocity Node right now. Name your buyout price." This was the decisive moment. The traditional tech startup dream dictated that I name a massive figure, cash out, and walk away a wealthy woman. But I did not build this machine to walk away. I built this to rule the board. I looked Caldwell dead in the eye and smiled, feeling the absolute weight of the power I now held. "Velocity Node is not for sale," I replied, my voice steady, cold, and completely devoid of hesitation. "I am not looking for a buyout. I am offering you an exclusive, multi-year software licensing agreement. You will pay a massive annual premium to utilize my decentralized infrastructure, and in return, you will possess the most advanced, unbreakable logistical network on the planet." Caldwell paused, studying my face carefully, trying to find a crack in my confidence or a sign of amateurish greed. He was a man accustomed to buying people out, not renting from them. "And what are your exact terms for this exclusive license?" he asked, his tone shifting from dismissive to strictly business. "One single condition," I said, leaning closer to the table. "Apex Global terminates all acquisition negotiations with AeroShift Logistics immediately. You walk away from Vance Sterling forever, and you leave him with absolutely nothing." The room grew incredibly quiet. Caldwell looked at the flawless performance metrics still glowing softly on my screen, then thought about the blazing operational dumpster fire that Vance was currently trying to put out. He realized the absolute truth in an instant. Vance was nothing but an empty suit, a hollow shell claiming ownership of someone else's genius. The real brain, the true architect of the logistics revolution, was sitting right in front of him, holding all the winning cards. Caldwell slowly extended his hand across the oak table. "You have a deal, Chloe," he said. The blood negotiation was complete, and the guillotine was set. Monday morning arrived with the crisp, cold promise of absolute victory. High above the sprawling Chicago skyline, on the 50th floor of the Apex Global Tower, Vance Sterling sat alone inside a massive glass boardroom. He adjusted his expensive silk tie and checked his gold watch, practically buzzing with anticipation. Today was the day he was scheduled to sign the final paperwork, trading his crumbling company for $200 million. He truly believed he had survived the technical disaster of the previous week. He believed he had won. The heavy oak door of the boardroom finally clicked open. Vance stood up, flashing his practiced, charismatic smile, ready to greet the Apex Global Executive Board. His smile instantly froze, fracturing into a mask of pure shock. It was not the vice president of mergers and acquisitions who walked through the door. It was me. I stepped into the room wearing a perfectly tailored black suit, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. Right behind me stood Marcus Thorne, wearing a cold, triumphant smirk that had been 2 years in the making. Vance stumbled backward, his voice cracking. "What are you doing here? Security is supposed to keep unauthorized personnel out." I did not say a single word. I walked straight to the massive mahogany table and placed a document directly in front of him. It was an advanced copy of a global press release, scheduled to hit the financial news wires in exactly 10 minutes. Vance looked down, his eyes scanning the bold black text. His face drained of all color, turning a sickening, ashen gray. The press release proudly announced a massive, multi-year strategic technology partnership between Apex Global and Velocity Node. The final paragraph delivered the fatal blow, formally stating that Apex Global had officially terminated all acquisition negotiations with AeroShift Logistics. The reality of his situation crashed down upon him all at once. His entire net worth had evaporated into absolute zero overnight. His legacy database was completely broken. His most lucrative clients had already migrated to my decentralized platform, and his sole corporate buyer had just partnered with the exact employee he threw away. AeroShift was no longer a company. It was just an empty, worthless shell drowning in massive server debt. Vance collapsed back into his leather chair. The polished arrogance was completely gone, replaced by the pathetic desperation of a ruined man. He looked up at me, his hands physically trembling. "Chloe, please," Vance begged, his voice dropping to a pathetic whisper. "You have the capital now. Buy AeroShift. Buy the shell. Just give me enough to pay off the commercial bank loans. If you do not buy it, I will lose absolutely everything. I will be ruined." I stood over him, looking down at the man who had planned to steal 3 years of my life's work just to line his own pockets. I placed both of my hands firmly on the edge of the table and leaned in close, stopping just inches from his face. My voice was ice cold, echoing the exact words I had heard through the broken air vent of the soundproof glass. "You are a good executive, Vance, but you are not a culture fit for me." I stood up, turned my back on his shattered empire, and walked out of the glass boardroom without a single backward glance. I took the elevator down to the lobby and stepped out onto the bustling streets of Chicago. The cold morning wind rushed past me, but I felt nothing but an overwhelming warmth. I was no longer a quiet engineer waiting to be discarded. I was the chief executive officer of a brand new empire, and my reign had just begun. Thank you so much to everyone for tuning in and listening to this story with us today. Please let us know in the comments where in the world you are listening from. If you enjoyed today's story, I want to sincerely remind you that our channel has lost its monetization on YouTube, which means we will not be uploading any new videos here in the near future. We are transitioning our operations to Patreon to survive. Please help us keep going by joining the Boss Revenge Stories Patreon, where you can listen to our best, most highly detailed, and emotionally captivating, exclusive true stories that we simply cannot make public on YouTube. You can join our community right now by scanning the QR code on your screen or by clicking the Patreon link provided in the video description and the pinned comment below.